Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to First Free Church. My name's Aaron. I'm one of the pastors here. Glad you're joining us tonight. Thanks for joining us for this special Buried Bible event. Just real quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with the podcast? All right, very good. Well, those of you who didn't raise your hand, you're in for a special treat. In just a few moments, we're going to hear from Dr. Mark Chavalis and Keegan Walls. Keegan Walls is one of my good friends, one of my dear friends, and Mark is also a friend, but he's also my father-in-law, which means he's also my kid's babysitter. And he wasn't available tonight, by the way, but he's here. This event is meant to be a practical tool for you. In fact, the main purpose of their podcast and the work that they do is to be a practical tool for your study of God's Word. Context matters when studying the Word of God, and this is about context. It's to help us know the heart of God. It's not so that we can puff our chests up about how much we know about God. It's meant to stir our affections towards Him. J.I. Packer says the purpose of theology is for the practice of doxology. The more we learn about God, the more we love Him. So that's what tonight is about. We hope you get a lot out of it. We hope you get a lot of value out of this time together. And really quick, if you haven't already done so, if you want to pull out your phones, you can take a picture of this QR code and you can subscribe to the Buried Bible podcast. These guys release content every week. There's a new topic, a new thing to talk about, and it's just a great tool to have in your belt as you're studying God's Word. So, and then again, towards the end of the evening, there's going to be a time for questions, and there's 2 microphone stands right out there. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Those will be illuminated as you exit your aisles towards the end of the night. And so if you don't plan to come up to the mic, you can also email questions into it's buriedbible@gmail.com. Again, buriedbible@gmail.com. Or if you're tuning in live with us tonight, you can just comment, again, send an email. But that's about all I got. So let's say a word of prayer, and then we'll dive right in. Lord Jesus, you're worthy, you're kind, you're faithful. Would you just meet us here in this place tonight as we open our hearts to learn more about you, because that's what this is about. This is about learning more about you and ultimately becoming more like you. And so I just pray for open hearts, open minds, to study your word and to know you more. Give us grace. We love you. We honor you. And everybody said, amen.
Buried Bible Live. My name, whoa. Wow. We never have anybody clap when we do that in our basement alone. My name is Keegan Walls. I'm the layman, and honored to be sitting next to the scholar, the archaeologist, the ex-professor, husband, father, grandpa, and my personal best friend, Dr. Mark Chavalis.
All right, Keegan, thank you. You've left me speechless, but I'll try.
I do that a lot. It's my gift in life.
Yes.
No, but he's got a long list. Every time you introduce him, you can pick about 30 things. Mine's easy. I'm a layman, which is a fancy term because, so just to tell you guys kind of how the podcast started, it was probably about a year ago. So like Aaron said, Aaron, his wife, are my wife, me and my wife's like best friends. And so I've known Mark for a long time and was studying, learning on my own, reading the Bible. I said, you know what, Elizabeth, I know your dad's pretty smart. I'm less smart than he is. So started meeting with him, asking him questions and just diving in. And it was just really opening my mind to the beauty and the depth of the Bible. And so at that time I was doing a different podcast and his kids were all talking about, yeah, my dad should really have a podcast. So I was talking to Mark and I said, your kids all want you to have a podcast. And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, Mark, listen, I have a podcast, 1.6 billion people have a podcast, everybody and their brother and uncle have a podcast, and none of us are qualified. You are overqualified. Like, if anybody's gonna have a podcast, you're actually qualified to speak on the topic. So I said, hey, if you want, I can help out. You can teach, I'll be behind the camera. And he eloquently was like, yeah, I don't want to really do it alone. I need somebody who doesn't know a lot, is kind of dumb. And I said, Mark, look no further. I've been practicing 31 years. And at that, I'm one of the best. And we came up with the term layman, and it makes me sound unbelievable. But my job is simply to ask questions because that's all I got. And if you've tuned into the podcast, Mark's job is to say, Keegan, I don't know. And so it's super helpful. But that's how the podcast got started. And so we're almost a year in. We're at about 38 episodes. Yeah. But the goal of our podcast, the goal of even doing this event is we both go here, but to have a live event, allow people to engage with Mark and his brilliance. But the goal is ultimately, I use this analogy that like the way that Mark is going to explain it, the way he unpacks it, when we look at the Bible, when we look at God and we try to understand the context, we try to understand the world behind the Bible, it's going to better help us apply that to our lives. We can't look at it from our modern 21st century mind frame, right? Like that's the mindset. Like that's just not the way that it was written. So if I can better understand the original author's intent, how the original audience heard it and understood it, I can better understand it for myself. And that's a very unique way of looking at it. And it's not, you don't necessarily have to do that, right? We can understand the gospel. We can remain in plain just reading the Bible. But I kind of compare it to this, that my favorite place on earth is Hawaii. I've been fortunate enough to go there. But before I went to Hawaii, I saw postcards of the beaches. And I can understand and see the beauty of it just on a picture. But then I go there, and we're walking down to the beach. We're up high, and I look down on it, and I can understand and see and be amazed at the beauty that now I'm seeing it in person. And then I go down to the beach, and I'm sitting in the sand, and I'm hearing the waves, and I'm smelling the salt, and I'm feeling like the mist hit me in the face, and I can understand the beauty a little bit more. And then if you're brave enough, and you're not afraid of sharks, unlike my wife, you can go into it. And it's a whole new level of beauty. And then I put my snorkel gear on and my fins, and I kind of you look like a dork. You can't snorkel super cool. But you get below the water, and the more you go, then all of a sudden you see the colors and the coral and the fish and all of this life by going under. And I could understand the beauty that was before me. On a postcard, I could see it from walking down. I could see it on the beach. But then going even deeper, it's a whole new level of beauty. And I think that when we really study and unpack the Bible, it is like that. You can understand the beauty of Jesus by just reading it, understanding the beauty of the simple gospel. But man, when we study it and we unpack it and we understand the context and the culture, because the Bible is written for us, but it was not written to us, and it can never mean to us what it never meant to them. So when I can go and I can understand the depth and the beauty and the richness of the Bible, holy cow, that's like having a skeleton and then putting the muscles and skin on it. It's no longer this little kiddie fairy tale 2D story. It becomes alive and active, and there is depth beyond our comprehension that we're never going to come to the end of knowing. And so our hope and our goal is to look at it in that light, help you guys fall more in love with Jesus, understand the depths of his love for us, understand the depth and beauty of his word, and for us to have a hunger to explore all that God's word has for us. And so that's the goal of this. And now I'll turn it over to him, the doctor.
I'm sorry, I was still in Hawaii. Man, I've never been there, so I mean that's amazing.
Buried Bible Live too.
Okay.
Hawaii.
You really do a lousy Bob Uecker imitation, because this guy keeps on saying, "Oh, I don't know anything." You won't believe the insights he gives me when he makes connections between this passage and that passage. And I said, "I've never thought of that before." And then I go and look at it and said, "Yeah, that's right." So anyway, don't listen to him when he talks like that.
Literally, don't listen to me.
All right. So I'm going to assume that a good amount of you are not familiar with the podcast, or if you are, you probably haven't looked at the beginning podcast. This is almost number 40, 39 I think we're doing right now. But in the early ones, I did sort of try to set the stage for what I want to do. And yes, like what Keegan said, from my standpoint, I retired from UWL, University of Wisconsin La Crosse, in the Department of History about a year and a half ago. And at the time, my children and my wife, Kimberly, by the way, we've been attending this church for almost 20 years. And so This is the old home week for us. This is our home. But we were all talking this, what are you going to do, Dad? What are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm just going to keep on studying. That's what I do. I'll just study. And what's the outlet going to be? I said, I don't know. And they said, well, you should do podcasts. I said, I don't know how to do a podcast. Well, you just get up there, get a microphone, and start talking. I said, well, there's probably more to it than that. And I knew Keegan. I knew he did podcasts. But God, of course, knew what to do, and so He brought us together. But I want to thank my family and again for just encouraging me to do this, and it's been a lot of fun, and I expect it to be a lot of fun tonight too. So let's go. Now, my own background, by the way, you might have already guessed, I'm not a Midwesterner. I'm from LA. Rumor has it that the team from Los Angeles just won the World Series, but I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, see, that proves that I'm not from here. But hey, I always want the Brewers to win as long as it's not at the expense of the Dodgers. But anyway, by the way, he was wearing a Dodgers hat in a family photo that I saw the other day. So
it was short for La Crosse.
Yeah. Yeah. LA logo. He's a turncoat.
La Crosse International Airport hat.
Yeah. Anyway, so my own background. Born and raised in Los Angeles, I was going to play third base for the LA Dodgers. The only thing that stopped me was talent. And so growing up, I loved history. I loved the Bible. I loved numbers, never knowing how I might mix any of those things. And so I went to college. The school that I went to ended up being called Cal State Northridge. Wasn't called that when I started there. That sort of dates me. But I couldn't do a math degree, so I ended up getting a history degree, and really liked ancient history. The closest place I could continue studying ancient history was UCLA. They gave me to the Mesopotamia professor, and I thought that was really cool. This is really strange and obscure stuff. I really didn't see how it would be connected to the Bible very much, at least at the beginning, but I was born and raised in a Presbyterian environment, and so I knew the Bible. I knew there was a connection between the ancient world, but I didn't know much about it. But I started learning it from my primary professor, Giorgio Bucciolati, was a devout Catholic who had studied in biblical studies as a young man in Italy, and he decided to study ancient Mesopotamia, which I'll be talking about, by the way, until it comes out your ears tonight. But that became especially so. He always knew the biblical background to the material, and he wasn't antagonistic to it. Though we might not see eye to eye in terms of, let's say, theological philosophy, we certainly both had a high view of Scripture. My other primary professor was a devout Lutheran, and so and most of my fellow students were pastors who wanted to study the Bible even deeper and learn the original languages, not just biblical Hebrew, but the other languages that are related to biblical Hebrew, like Babylonian and other things. And so I didn't know what I fell into. I literally did not. And so I got my degree, and my professor said, by the way, you're going with us on digs to the Middle East, and which I thought was really strange. I didn't even like sandbox as a kid, let alone going out on digs. But I ended up going for 9 seasons of excavating in Syria along the Euphrates. Both of the main sites that I worked at will be on the maps that we'll be showing in a few minutes. And I could begin to see how this was a very powerful background to the Bible, and I'm going to try to explain that in a few minutes. When I was looking for a position after I was done with my degrees, UWL was looking for somebody who did ancient history and archaeology, so I decided to apply. I knew nothing about the upper Midwest. I was raised to hate the Packers. They beat the Rams every year when I was a kid. Some guy named Lombardi was the coach. And so that was painful, but I said, all right, I can get over that. And I didn't realize that football was really, I mean, it was very religious out here. I did not see that. But anyway, enough of that. So I got here, Kimberly and I came with our oldest son at the time, Anthony, and started at UWL, a secular school, but as a Bible-believing Christian, they did not really know who they were hiring. And so every class I taught, the Bible was in there somewhere. And of course, I taught a course on ancient Israel. It would really be hard to teach a course on ancient Israel without the Bible. And so I did that for 35 years. And that was a lot of fun, teaching in a secular environment and talking with students who were interested in knowing more, and of course, those who were struggling with their faith and trying to intellectually try to understand things. And so I found that was the type of ministry. By the way, if I would have gone to Bible college, I could not have taught at a place like UWL. And so God knew what he was doing, because if I would have known better, I would have gone to a Bible college rather than even a secular school like UCLA. But God knew what he was doing. And I kind of think if you read the Old Testament, when you look at all the patriarchs, they're sort of all fumbling around doing, they might have faith, but they're usually doing a lot of ignorant things, but God guides them towards his purpose. And so I didn't know any better, and he got me here. In fact, even doing this, I could not have possibly started a podcast on my own, and Keegan knows that, believe me. And by the way, he does not live in my basement. Although my grandchildren, hi kids, they actually will ask occasionally, can we see Keegan? And I said, well, he's not here right now. And I have to keep the lie on, like, well, he's gone. But anyway, that'd be awkward, by the way. But anyway.
Yeah, it'd be the happiest day of your life if I moved in.
So I think one of the goals I have is to try to establish a foundation for why it is important. By the way, you really sum things up well. It's like, what am I going to say? You just sort of stole all my thunder. But when you study the Old Testament in its original context, I would say it's icing on the cake. It's not mandatory, but and I use this example. I probably did in one of the early podcasts, but I can't think of a better one. You know, when I was a little kid, we had great TV sets. I mean, I remember watching the 1960 World Series on a little black and white TV as a kid, thinking this is really cool. But it's really different than having a television set in 2025, and you probably wouldn't want to go back to it. For those of you who are around my age, it's like I can see a lot better. Things are a lot clearer. I can understand things better. So that's what I want to do. And by the way, the resources that you have in 2025 are amazing. You can basically get just about anything you want at the snap of a finger in terms of even the resources for ancient history. So when people are asking me, what can I look at? In fact, here are some resources you have on the screen here. I brought a couple of them here. These are a couple of books that I've worked on, either co-authored or co-edited. The one on the far right, the Bible background commentary, John Walton, who's, by the way, responsible for that quote about the Bible was written for us, but not to us. John contacted me in, the late 90s and said, we're setting up something with IVP, Bible background. We've already done a couple of the chapters. One fellow dropped out, so what do you think? And I said, sure, John. We had been roommates at conferences, and so that was the start of something really big. We didn't realize it would be translated into probably about a dozen or more languages already. So that's a lot of fun. It's a nice starter for looking at verses that seem to be odd. So that one. The next one is a little more pointy-headed, the Mesopotamia in the Bible. By the way, I came up with that title. I thought it was really cool. And the reason I came up with that title is because it's about Mesopotamia in the Bible. But it's a series of about 12, 15 scholars who put together individual articles and topics connecting the ancient Near Eastern world. By the way, that would be the ancient areas of outside of Egypt, because Egypt really is a different planet when it comes to this stuff. It's a different world. But it would be the area of Israel, Lebanon, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, which is the core. That's the core of Mesopotamia itself, and then Iran. And so a series of scholars have put that together. I'm not even sure if that book is in print, but if you go to enough garage sales, you should be able to get one for 25, maybe 50 cents or more. But I think it's probably available in some locations. But that's a little more scholarly. The third one is the illustrated Bible background commentary, because Zondervan didn't want to be done by IVP, and so they conscripted John Walton again to be the general editor for that. That happens to be, I think, volume 5. There's a New Testament version of that too, but John conscripted me to write, I don't know, 2 of the minor prophets. I'd have to look and see which ones, but it's on there. It's more detailed. It has a lot more bibliography in it, and it's got really cool pictures, but no pop-ups, Keegan. But really nice. And the fourth one is not available, by the way.
This is what he first started writing on when he was little.
Yeah. By the way, this is a clay tablet. This is not an original. It's a facsimile, but an exact mold of something that we did find in Syria at the ancient site of Turka, which is roughly the same time period as Abraham, about 4,000 years ago. This is the average size of a tablet. If you had your phone out, of course, it would fit right in your hand. It has information on it, maybe not quite as much as a modern phone, but things haven't changed that much. But this was the mode of communication in the ancient Near East. Scribes did this. Do you know how many of these have been found since in the 1840s? Probably 1 million. That's a lot. Now, they haven't all been translated yet because there aren't enough starving graduate students around to work on these things, but a significant amount have been translated. I would say maybe 25%. I'm not sure exactly. The British Museum has the most, about 132,000 tablets and fragments, so that's a big one. But this was their mode of communication. It's a script. Multiples languages were used in this mode. Certainly the ones that Abraham would have known, who I'll be talking about in just a moment. But this was the script and the language system that I was trained to learn. In fact, I even taught it at UWL about every other semester for about 20 years. And I had some students who wanted to go on further. One or two that took about 6 or 7 semesters of it. They just wanted to keep on going till they got it right. I had 7 years training at it. And I'm not saying that to brag. It's because that's how long it took to figure it out. The biggest problem I had with cuneiform is that most of the translations of the stuff we had to work with were not in English. They were either in French or the really hard language, German. So we'll address those, or at least the material. I'm going to try to enter into that world of the ancient Near East. And why would I do that with the Bible? Well, maybe we can go to the next slide for a moment, and you can take a look at that. I'm going to start off with the patriarch of, the ancestor of our faith, Abraham. And when you look at that passage, I'm not going to, I think, go to it myself, but I think that it's known well enough, and you can take a look at Genesis, the end of Genesis 11, about verse 31, which has about a 2-sentence narrative, and then the first couple of verses in chapter 12. By the way, there are no original chapter and verse divisions, and so it's an artificial thing, although it's really convenient because, of course, if they weren't there, how would we figure out where I was talking about? Like, all right, I'm in Genesis somewhere, just scroll down a while until you find the word "the," and then you will be on the same track. No, I don't think so. So anyway, so Abraham is from Mesopotamia. Does this sound weird if I tell you that he's not an Israelite? How could he be an Israelite? If he's the father of that nation, he's got to come from somewhere else. And so I'm the person who tries to study that somewhere else. It's been 50 years and I'm still in that somewhere else. My joke is when I get older, maybe I'll get to the Bible. And so finally, now that I'm retired, now the Bible's become my centerpiece, but the background, of course, is the thing that I use to try to understand that. So Abraham's from Mesopotamia. He comes from a city called Ur of the Chaldees, and so maybe we can get here are the two maps. I think it's the one on my right on this side. Yes, on the bottom you see where the arrow is. That's where Ur is, Ur of the Chaldees. And by the way, when the writer puts in the term Ur of the Chaldees, it's rather odd. Like, is there another Ur? And there was not another major Ur. There are a few other minor cities called Ur, but he's letting you know to make sure you understand this is the Ur I'm talking about. The problem is the term Chaldean is not used until well over 1,000 years after Abraham, but it's really not a bad thing. It's kind of like if I'm talking about the Native Americans of, let's say, 1,000 years ago, well, they don't know about some Italian guy's first name as the name of his country, America. Okay, anyway. Can you imagine if it was the United States of Fred? But anyway, nothing wrong with Fred. Or Keegan, United States of Keegan. That'd be... All right, sorry. So, but the point is, it's a purposeful anachronism, but the writer's telling you, oh, by the way, our ancestor comes from Ur of the Chaldees. You know what they're telling you? They're telling you volumes right now. They're saying, we know where we originally come from. So 5 of my 6 children were born and raised in Wisconsin. But you better believe that their father keeps on letting them know, I'm not from around here. I'm a Southern Californian. I really am, And so, and my wife's from Pennsylvania. And so we let them know, old country for us is, out west or out east. And then, of course, there's more old country too. But the point is, we recognize our original roots. And so any Israelite knows fully well they come from Babylonia, which is the southern part of Mesopotamia. They're well aware of it. And when I start reading Genesis like that, things start falling into place. Okay? When you start looking at some of the things that Abraham does, it sort of shows that, you think about it. God calls Abraham, and his name's still Abram, in Genesis 12. He doesn't exactly say, oh, by the way, I'm the true God. There aren't any other ones. You should stop doing what you're doing, and I want you to worship me exclusively. He doesn't start off that way, does he? He basically tells Abraham, Abraham, this is who I am, and I've got a great deal for you. All you have to do is be loyal to me, and I'm going to make you a great nation. All I want you to do is get up and go. Where am I going, Lord? Just keep on going. I'll let you know. And of course, he doesn't let him know. And so where does Abraham go first? He goes to Haran. That's the other map. That's way north. And by the way, to get there, you wouldn't use those arrows. You'd use the river, use the Euphrates River. And by the way, when he's traveling up, he's going to pass by Terka there, which is just below that circle. Probably never heard of Terka. That was the first site that I worked on for 6 of my 9 seasons. Was at Terka. My dissertation I was on a private house at Terka, 1/2 of a house, and you had to write a whole book on it. Pretty
New York
tedious.
Times bestseller.
Okay. So anyway, I don't always hear everything he says, but I just act like I do.
For the better.
Yeah, it definitely is better. So, and by the way, we're sort of switched too. I'm usually on the other side. But so he passes by Terka to go up to Haran. Why would he go to Haran? Have you ever wondered that? Maybe you didn't. I mean, I'm a historian. I always wonder about things like that. And by the way, it's the anecdotal pieces of information in the Bible that are really cool. It's when they're not trying to tell you something. That's when the historians start salivating like, oh, That's like if you're watching a movie and you're wondering, I wonder when this movie is made, and all of a sudden the guy pulls out a flip phone. Oh, it's at least 15 years old, or whatever. And so I'm not going to watch this movie anymore. But the point is, there are little hints here and there. And so Abraham goes up to Haran. What's the deal with Haran? Well, you wouldn't know it, but of the close to 100,000 texts from Ur, the main deity at Ur was the moon god. And the only other city that had the moon god as the primary deity was, you guessed it, Haran. And not only that, there are two main language groups in southern Mesopotamia: the Sumerians, you probably heard of them in school, and the Akkadians. And the Akkadians spoke a Semitic language that was pretty close to biblical Hebrew. It would probably be as close as maybe Italian is to French. Like, now you probably couldn't understand each other when you're talking, but if you wrote it down, you could probably get the gist of what's going on by the roots. And of course, I was on a dig on a French dig one season, but we had a bunch of Italians. When the Italians spoke French, I couldn't understand them because they were slower and they always put a vowel at the end of the word. And of course, the French don't even finish their sentence, their words. It's a joke, a bad joke. But the point is that those two language peoples were there. But Abraham was probably neither of those, by the way. This might sound weird. He's probably an Amorite. But the term Amorite's kind of like the word American. If I use the word American, you have to know what the context is. I'm not talking about a continent. I'm talking about a people group. The term American probably means is a lot different meaning in 2025 than it would have been in, let's say, 1725, when there's no nation yet. And of course, Canadians, are they Americans? Well, they are Americans if you talk about North Americans. In other words, the term Amorite, we find out, is a really generic word. But Abraham was probably one of them. We now know that Amorites, the core of that land was up in the north where Haran was. That's where his people were. And of course, and we know that there was an Amorite migration that went into southern Mesopotamia about maybe 3 or 4 centuries before Abraham. So his family had probably been in the south for a while, and now God's telling him to leave. He's probably thoroughly pagan, by the way, when God calls him. I'm saying I think he has no knowledge whatsoever of the true God or what it means to be a monotheist. And I think God teaches him in stages. And this is not the traditional way of looking at it, but I suppose as historians, we try to, break things down. But as a Christian, of course, I want to make sure I always look at things in the framework of my faith. And so it's important to see that. So Abraham goes up to Haran, and ultimately, which again is also the center. Unfortunately, Haran has not been excavated in the same way that Ur was. Too many things going on. And by the way, today it's actually in Turkey. And then Abraham would then fully come here. And by the way, Abraham's not we think of Abraham being a rustic guy out in the middle of the desert. If he were alive today, Abraham would have come from New York City before he went to the wilds of Iowa. I know, you have to make Iowa jokes if you're from Wisconsin. I found that out very early. In fact, the first time I was told an Iowa joke, the first thing I said was, "Why do you make Iowa jokes? What's the difference?" And they said, "Well, Iowans are rural." I said, "I come from Los Angeles. What do you mean by rural?" I came from the San Fernando Valley, which was considered rural because it only had 1.5 million people. But anyway, now, I can spot Iowans from 50 meters. There's 17 in the room right now, by the way. Okay. The straw hats and all that. Anyway, okay. My son-in-law is Iowan, by the way. But anyway, okay. So I better keep on going.
No, that was good. Right. I was waiting for you to say.
So the point is that if you're an Israelite, you recognized where your roots are. You know you come from pagan Mesopotamia, okay? And The fact that Abraham came from there, I think a lot of the weird customs that are going on in Genesis, it's because the writer decided, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is what actually happened. This is how these people worked, and this is how they operated. And so when I look at the thousands of texts from Mesopotamia, I think I can put Abraham in there pretty well. I haven't found him, but his name, the personal names of many of the people in it, in the stories are there. And so it really makes a lot of sense. And you know, the difference between the people from Mesopotamia and the people of Israel the difference is subtle. It's very powerful. It's very deep. But the similarities are superficial. What I mean by that is this. The Israelites are part of the ancient Near Eastern world. Even if Abraham didn't come from Mesopotamia, they were a part of that world in the same way that if you were living in 5025 AD and you only had one guidebook, and that was, I don't know, I keep on using the same example, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, and you're trying to figure out what life was like, thousands of years ago along the Mississippi, and you've got this one book, and then all of a sudden you find the Library of Congress. It's like the whole book opened up. Now we understand everything that's going on there. It's this context, and that context, etc. But also, let's say you're called out by God today in 2025. This is imaginary, of course, but let's say God calls you and he wants you to start something new, and he's calling you to leave your land. Well, guess what? You're still probably going to like the Packers. You're still going to, eat cheese curds. And you know what I'm saying is that all of the external attributes that you have of being from Wisconsin, you'll still like hunting, I'm guessing. All the things that, you'll probably want to go to another cold weather place, etc. But, your accent will still be the same, the Midwestern accent. But you're going to say, no. The meaning behind everything I do is different. And that's exactly what happens with the Israelites. And so when you find out, and this is 150 years ago, that there are older flood stories in the Bible, what do we do now? My answer is, but this is the authoritative one. The other ones perverted the truth with their perverted understanding of polytheistic experiences, etc. Here's what the true God says. And so the fact that ours is later is really meaningless in terms of importance. And so don't be intimidated when somebody says, well, the Bible just copied their stuff from other cultures. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. So anyway, we're going further. Now, from Abraham, let's just go to Genesis. I want to briefly talk about Genesis, and then I want to do a little teaser on Joshua 10. I do plan to do a longer podcast on Joshua 10, by the way. And so let's go to Genesis 1 for just a minute. And I want you just to think about these things while you're thinking of Genesis 1. And of course, Genesis 1, the creation of the world. What's the purpose? God created everything out of nothing. And he did it in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. This is pretty much this is how I read it as a modern. And then, of course, being a scientific modern, my goal is to try to understand, how do I place this ancient text into my modern scientific framework? By the way, the ancient writer could care less, and I have to realize, what are the types of questions that they're trying to answer? And am I answering the same questions that they're having? And not always. So what are the types of questions that they're asking? First of all, there are older creation stories from Mesopotamia. Some of them half a millennium or a millennium older. Even if Moses was the absolute only author and there's no later editorial additions, by the way, if there are, they're also divinely inspired, by the way, but they're just anonymous. But so here are some of the questions I think the writer's thinking about, even if we're not. The first question is order. It's not so much how did everything come into being, it's what did the divine being do with the stuff that's here? In Mesopotamia, there's absolute chaos, and with that chaos, there's war, there's bloodshed, there's destruction, and there's finally order after all the bad guys are killed. Kind of like everything that happens on the earth with wars, with kingdoms, etc. But in the Bible, they're saying, no, you've heard that story. Now we're going to tell you the true story. There's only one God, and he had no one who fought against him because nobody could fight against him. And he ordered creation the way he wanted to. And so it's primarily about order. It's also written in a poetic way, even though it's narrative. That sounds odd. The first couple chapters, Genesis 1 through 3, it's written in narrative, except when there's poetry. And by the way, all the poetry is supposed to be sung. Keegan's going to do the singing
today.
part. But not today. Does that mean later? Yes.
Our next live podcast.
So anyway, the poetic, the material in Genesis 1, I want you to think of it in an orderly fashion rather than necessarily only sequential. So for example, if you look at the days, and so we can go to the next
probably keep going. Skip to that last creation.
You know the chapters, and so I'm not going to go into the text, but if you start looking at the days of creation, for example, have you ever wondered why it talks about the deep? Like, what's the deep, and why are we talking about it? In Mesopotamia, the deep was the creation goddess who basically spawned the universe and then was murdered, and so she was destroyed. But the point, Tiamat, and so the word in Hebrew, Tehom, is etymologically the same word, except in the Bible, she becomes a water prop. But everybody reading it 3,000 years ago knows that. It'd be kind of like if I'm telling you a story and all of a sudden about the Revolutionary War, and I have my hero meet the general of the army, some guy named George Washington. Well, but then we just move on. You're thinking, well, everyone knows who George Washington is. I don't even have to introduce him. Well, the writer doesn't have to introduce what's going on there, because most of these people who are listening to this story are probably well-versed in paganism and polytheism. It's part of their world. And so they have to be retrained to understand monotheism. And by the way, the difference between polytheism and monotheism is not simply many gods versus one God. It's much deeper than that. But so we have the deep, the days. Look at this. Have you ever noticed that day one, you've got all the lights and stuff are made, and then it's not till day 4 that we have the luminaries that are put in. And by the way, the sun and the moon, you know what they're called in Genesis? The big light and the little light. Like, why didn't you just use their names? Is because they were the two of the most powerful deities in Mesopotamia. And so the writer's dissing them, like, I'm not even giving them their due. They're just props. It's the big prop and the little prop. And so they don't even get a title. And then day 2, okay, the sky and the water are made, and then they're filled in on day 5. And then the land is made on day 3. And day 6 is when you fill it in with the land animals. And of course, the last thing that's made out of dirt, the creature that's going to run everything, the human being, the Adam. And you would expect that first, and it's less. It's like, wow, that's really weird. Does that look sequential to you? It doesn't look sequential to me. And so I'm just going to ask you to think about that, is that when you run across somebody who doesn't think the Bible talks about a literal 7-day creation, don't stop and say, it's over, I'm not going to talk to him anymore. The ancient Hebrew mindset might not be thinking the same way we are. They understand the parallelism and the use of numbers that are in the first couple chapters are astonishing. The multiples of 7 are all over the place. They all have meaning. We're not sure always what they are, it just tells me that there's a lot more going on than simply a wooden reading of the text. And by the way, when God rests, the term probably means he stopped what he was doing. And you know what he does? You know what kings do when they stop? They stop, either they're building or they're fighting wars. When they're all done, they sit down and they start ruling. So God probably is sitting on his throne now. And you know why what the rest is for? For us to stop and worship him. And so that's why there's a connection between the Sabbath and the rest day to worship, which is rather interesting in my opinion. So anyway, so I want you to think of Genesis in that regard. And then briefly, maybe just a moment or two, I think we'll skip
we'll skip tattoos.
That tattoo part just to be fun. And to go on to Joshua just for a moment. So I want to go to Joshua 10 just to show you how I look at a text. This is just sort of a tease because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. And so, let me summarize the first 10 verses of Joshua. By the way, Joshua is a book that it's a war narrative. In fact, we found lots and lots of annals from the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. They read a lot like the Joshua. And so, in other words, we found its context. This is a war journal. It's going, we went to this city, we went to that city, we were successful here, we did this, we did that. The difference is that in the Joshua text, if they make mistakes, they're talked about. You never find that in the Assyrian annals. Everything works out exactly how it's supposed to. Kind of like listening to a presidential speech or a presidential address. Everything worked out exactly like I wanted it to. It's perfect. Both parties do that, of course. But we expect that. So anyway, so Joshua, so what has happened? It's the story of Gibeon. Remember in Joshua 9, the Gibeonites fake out the Israelites. Hey, we're from really far away and we wanted to make a treaty with you guys. So we came from really, really far, and so they forgot to consult God. They made a treaty with him, and you know that it's going to bite them later on, and you didn't know it was going to be 5 minutes later, and that's Joshua 10. And so now we have Gibeon, a very large city, is evidently, they made a treaty with Israel, but they had already had treaties with other countries. And by the way, in the ancient Near East, if you make a treaty with a country, Keegan's a little king, I'm a big king. I already told him I'm going to be the big king. If we make a treaty, one of the stipulations is you can't just make treaties with anybody else. You have to get permission from me. If somebody attacks you, I'm going to help you. If I get attacked, you're going to give me troops. In other words, we're bound, okay? And so you have to have a treaty. So if Gibeon makes a treaty outside, the other kings around him are going to be really upset. And by the way, the kings surrounding him, though we don't have the names, that we haven't found any of those names of kings in outside sources, they sound just like the kings that were living at that time. In fact, the first king of Jerusalem that we know of in the Bible, of course, is Melchizedek. And here's somebody named Adonai-Zedek, same last part of the word, which either is a divine being or just the word for righteous. We don't know exactly, or it could be both. But he's also a king of Jerusalem, and so then this is probably hundreds of years later. And other kings decide they're going to attack Gibeon. Gibeon, of course, now sends word to Joshua, who's up at Gilgal. Let's go to the map for a second. And so Joshua is up at Gilgal. It's probably about 20 miles from there. And remember what Joshua decides to do? He decides to march all night to get there. Why would the writer bother to tell us that? It's because that's really unusual. Why do you think soldiers don't like to march at night? Because they can't see. I had to be told that. But the point is that that's not a smart thing to do. And if I'm the enemy and they're not there in the morning, I'm thinking, well, they're not coming because they got to march all night, And you wake up the next morning and there's Joshua's army ready to fight them. and they probably were astonished. We actually have a Hittite annal where Marcellus talks about marching all night because it was so unusual. And so he does that. And what does God do on the way, when he's there? What's the miracle? I know it's the sun stood still, but that's not what the text says. Read the text. The miracle was that big hailstones were sent down from heaven and attacked the enemy. Like, well, that's pretty cool. That's really interesting. So now let me go to the actual passage. And of course, what's the Sunday school story about this? The Sunday school story is, well, Joshua came and God stopped the sun for him and the moon so he could keep on fighting for the rest of the day. In other words, it must have been later in the day, and he needed more time to defeat his enemies, and so the sun stopped in midair. By the way, wouldn't that be a pretty cataclysmic thing if that actually happened? But if you read the Bible, it doesn't actually say that. So what does it say? Okay, so here I'm in Joshua 10. And so what does he ask for? Verse 12. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, so who's talking? Joshua. And then Joshua starts talking to the sun and the moon. Have you ever noticed that? Like, Joshua started talking to the sun and the moon? Isn't that sort of weird? I mean, does that become like a norm for anybody? Does anybody do that because Joshua did it? I think that's sort of ignored. Like, wait a minute, why would you start talking? He says, oh, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and oh, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. I'm going to anglicize it and just keep it like that. Now, go back to the map, please, Sam. And so if you look at that map, the red dot is where Gibeon is. Where's Ajalon? Further west. So if the sun is at Gibeon, what time of day is it? The sun's in the east. Where does it rise? It's the first thing in the morning. Okay, if it's the first thing in the morning, does Joshua need time? Well, I think I'm going to need more than 12 hours. So, no, he doesn't need time. That's not what's going on here. Okay, that's not what's going on here. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher? Hey, that'd be cool. Can you go pick that up? Yeah, it's in the other room? Okay. No, that's one of those non-extant books that didn't survive the cut from ancient history to the present. By the way, if you Wikipedia Book of Jasher, it'll tell you about a Book of Jasher. There's a forgery from the 17th century. Don't even think about it. Okay, it's not. And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about, now it says a whole day. Actually, the literal meaning is favorable day. That's different than whole day. Okay, why do they write it that way? Because that's the tradition, and you're not supposed to buck tradition. You get in trouble. That's what Mesopotamian scholars do. So then it says, there was no day like it before or after it. You're thinking, yeah, the sun stopped. But that's not what it says. When the Lord listened to the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. What? I had to think about that and think about that and think about that and realize, so what's really going on here? What was the miracle? That God's up in his divine council deliberating, and of course, God, think about it, when God deliberates in his divine council, he knows everything. And so why is he talking to the council? To let them participate in the same way that, when we're praying, it's like, God, do this and do that. So that's what what are you supposed to, you're supposed to pray in Jesus' name. What does that mean? According to the will. In other words, you're being put into God's will, and so you get to participate. If you don't want to participate, God says, okay, I'll just use somebody else. My plan is going to go on ahead with you or without you. Joshua got to participate. It's as if Joshua, I have this I'm going to ask him, did you just like go in there and say, hey, God, would you do this for me? And well, yes. And I'm thinking of God patting him on the back. That's a good boy. That's a nice thing yeah, I'll do that for you. And I mean, the writer's saying the day was amazing because God listened to a man. It doesn't even say the day was amazing because the sun stopped. And by the way, it's poetry. And in fact, the first person to make this connection was my buddy John Walton, who's on here. I have to grudgingly give him credit for this. In fact, he did it at a conference I was at and heard his paper 30 years ago. When you're at a conference and you're giving your own paper, it's like you're hardly listening to anybody else. You're just thinking of your own paper. I'm going to read this paper. I got to get it right. And somebody else is talking. What I'm doing is really important. So I barely heard his paper, but he talked about the sun standing still. He says, in Mesopotamia, in omens, it talks about the sun and the moon stopping and waiting for each other because the Mesopotamians were obsessed with celestial omens. All times. You're thinking, well, who cares about that? Why would Joshua care about that? I'll explain that in a minute. So let me just read a note or two about a typical omen, okay, and see if this makes any sense to you. If I can get there. All right, I'll get there. Come on, John, where'd you put it? Yes, when the moon does not wait for the sun and disappears, there will be raging of lions and wolves. This is on the 15th. By the way, it's the 15th day since the new moon. On the 14th day of the new moon, if the sun and the moon are standing together in the sky, and of course that's what it looks like, it's a good omen. If I'm a general, I say, that's a good day to fight when we get a good omen. You wonder why the Vikings don't use this. All right, on the 15th, it's a bad day. And so I'm telling you right now, my guess is, and I'm going to go into much more detail about this in a podcast soon and flesh all of it out. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. In fact, about 5,000 actual sentence omens where it tells you, and most of them are celestial, with the moon. And the term, when it says to stand here, a literal meaning is wait, which is interesting. And what is it waiting for? It's waiting for the moon. And of course, when you're going out there, we talk about the sun rising. Does the sun rise? No. But we still use it because that's what we've always used. But we know we're not to take it literally. Are we going to allow the biblical writers the same thing? Do they ever use figures of speech? All the time. Do you know that in Judges 4, it says when the Israelites, when the judges Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites, it says not a man of the Canaanites was left. And in the very next sentence, a man was left. You're thinking, what happened there? It's called hyperbole. And they knew it. It's like the Vikings will get slaughtered this weekend against the Packers. Well,
that's going to age poorly.
Well, that's because they're not playing the Rams. But it's like, but they're going to play the next week. How does that work? But the point is, this is probably a planetary omen that Joshua knows. Now, why would he use that? Because he knows he's fighting pagans. And by the way, any general, whether pagan or monotheist, would always consult the divine being to find out whether they should go fight. When the Israelites don't do it, they get in big trouble. They consult, by the way, it's called divination. Divination inherently is not bad. Wrong divination is bad. Divination, when you're consulting the true God in the way you're supposed to, either with the Urim and the Thummim, which we still don't know exactly what they are, or by prayer, or by prophet or whatever, that's what you're supposed to do. The pagans had their own divination, so they're saying, today's a good day to fight. I think Joshua is saying, can we find a bad day for them to fight? And I think that's what's going on here. And so I know you probably have a million questions about this, But my response is that's probably what's going on here. Standing and waiting are the typical phrases used in Mesopotamian divinatory celestial observation. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But of course, we didn't know that until the 1890s. But here's the problem. Most Mesopotamian scholars aren't interested in biblical studies, and most biblical scholars aren't interested in Mesopotamian studies. And so people like me who've tried to do both, in fact, whenever I go to Bible conference, they look at me and say, oh, you're that Mesopotamian guy. If I go to a Mesopotamian conference, they look at me, oh, you're that Bible guy. And so it's like you can't win. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but and so because they're really two distinct fields, but they have to communicate more. When they communicate, we begin to learn, and we open up and we find out there's new meaning. Does this change anything about God's power? No. Now, by the way, if I go up to heaven and God says, hey, Mark, the sun did stand still, I'm going to say, okay, I took my best shot, And by the way, when you're a historian and you deal with stuff like this, you give it your best shot. And by the way, the more I study, the more questions I have that are unanswered. In fact, I have a lot more questions now than I had before I started 50 years ago. And I'm the type that doesn't get frustrated by that. It's like, oh, there's more to do tomorrow. I'll wake up with more work to do. And so don't be frustrated by that. But of course, I think we're going to find out by your questions. So that's really a teaser. There's a lot more to it, but we're open up to just about anything you want to ask. And by the way, I know we have a time limit. 8 o'clock is pretty sharp. I was told that if we're not out of the building, I might as well camp out. I did bring a pillow, but by about 8:10, I think we're gone here. So I think we can start the questions. And by the way, when I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and I'm going to go and look it up, or we'll see what happens. But I want to see what the pulse is out here.
Yeah, and so if you do have questions, it does not have to just be about Joshua 10. It can just be Old Testament questions. If you are a shy type and don't like a microphone, the person you came with is a perfect messenger for the questions. Push them towards the microphone, and if we don't have anybody come to the mics, I'll look at you for a long time. 28 minutes, I'll look at you.
Keegan always has a million questions, but they always become like, yeah, I'd rather hear your questions. That's all I'm going to say.
I have a question. I don't know how eloquent it will be, but I will try. So I've always wondered about why there's killing allowed with wars and all of that, specifically with taking the promised land, and just not understanding why God allows that. And I don't know if promote is the right word, but it feels so separate than the 10 Commandments saying thou shalt not kill, and then Jesus coming and saying turn the other cheek, and vengeance is the Lord's, and all of that. So I'm just wondering if you could expound. Is it expand or expound?
I'll do my best to give you a fairly brief answer, but I think, first of all, if you read all the words of Jesus, he actually talks a lot about the destruction of the evil. And so I think sometimes we get this skewed view of Jesus if he's just sort of meek and just talks about turning the other cheek. That is the ideal, of course. But when he talks about the enemies of God will be destroyed, he's quite consistent. Now, when you look at, for example, the 10 Commandments and the term thou shalt not kill, that Hebrew term is somewhere in between kill and murder. And so, which is sort of a hard one to take. It really, what it means, I think, is you're not supposed to kill someone who's under the covenant. And what does that mean? Well, think about it. Does that cover accidental death? Well, no, that was accidental. In other words, this is purposeful. And so you're not supposed to kill someone. It doesn't mean, any Israelite would have told you that doesn't mean you're not killing under any circumstances. Don't even, don't kill a fly or anything else. They all knew what it meant. It meant you're not supposed to murder one of your countrymen. That's what it means, okay? The state, of course, has its own mandate from God. You are to punish those who are deserving of death. Now, there's also a lot of terrible killing in the Bible, but there's all sorts of stuff that's unspeakable. I mean, you read the end of the book of Judges, it's probably the worst part of the book. You read Judges 19 through 21, and it's like, wow, that's about the most despicable events ever in all of literature, let alone the Bible. You're thinking, why is it in there? It's because it's the lowest level of humanity. And actually, there's probably a deeper question to all this. It's not like why is it there? Why does God allow it? It's like, why did God make us to begin with? I mean, it's a deeper question than it's like, why did God allow us to be created and then allow for sin? Didn't he know that was going to happen? This is a deep theological question that of course, it defies an easy answer. It's like, why did you make us? You must have thought we were worth it. Because, of course, if you read something like Hosea 11, and if you wonder whether God has emotions, his emotions overturn within him. It says, all my compassions are kindled inside of me, in verse 8 of chapter 11 of Hosea. And then he says, and he's about ready to put the gavel down and judge Israel. He says, he's like this. Nope, I can't do it. I can't do it. All my compassions are kindled in me. This is all poetic, but the point is he's saying, my mercy is going to triumph over justice. I'm going to give you another chance. And of course, they still, defy him. And then finally he does it. During the flood, I talked about this in a previous podcast, when God decides, when it says God was sorry that they made mankind, and it says it grieved him. The word for grieving there is the same word used for a mother in childbirth. Okay, in other words, he's in the greatest amount of agony that anyone can imagine. What's the worst agony that you can think of? Oh, it's that. That's what God's feeling right now. And when it says he was sorry, it's actually a word for deep, deep compassion rather than, gee, I'm sorry I did that. I wish I hadn't done it. That's not what it means at all. It might mean that for a human. So the point is, when you have all that killing and murder and polygamy and incest and all these terrible, unspeakable things, God's back there grieving over it. You're thinking, well, why doesn't he do something about it? Well, he is. He decided to become a sin bearer himself and incarnate himself, and he thought we were worth it, which is just, mind-blowing from that standpoint. So I think it's actually a very justified question. Why is it there? And God's saying, I got it covered. It's going to take about 80 hours of reading for you to figure out from point A to point B how painful it is for the first person to go against me. And you know what sin is? Sin is treason. If you think of sin as treason, we've committed treason against the King of the universe. And the judgment has already been pronounced, but God's is, when I say struggling, I'm using quotes. He's struggling with justice and mercy, and he wants so much to give us mercy, but he can't go against his nature, and the only way he can do it is by becoming the sin bearer himself. It's like, wait a minute, do you really think, you made us out of dust, we're dust people, and you think we're worthy of doing that for us? It's like, what was the Wesleyan, amazing love? How can it be? In other words, I don't get it. And so I understand the question, and I would say from earth, it looks inconsistent. Because, every time that the patriarchs make a mistake or people do evil things, you would want the Bible to stop and say, all right, now this was wrong, but it doesn't. But isn't that what they do in great literature, where you the main character has done something really stupid or really evil, and you're thinking, I hope he gets it, or she gets it or whatever, and then of course they do, but it's usually poetic, or they're going to get it because when you're watching a movie, the music changes or the angle changes. Oh, good, the bad guy's going to get it, And so you know that, Abraham lies about his wife, and he's going to pay for it we pay for it for the next 4,000 years because of the sin. And so don't worry. God's saying, don't worry, I've got it covered. All that evil that's happening, I'm not ignoring it. I've got a plan. And by the way, you know what it says? And it's in a side verse in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 1 or 2. Paul says, when Christ came and they put him to death, if they would have known what that meant, they wouldn't have done it. In other words, nobody figured it out. He probably hadn't even told his divine council what he was doing.
I'd agree with that.
Okay. Another one.
In discussions about passages like those who bless Israel will be blessed, there's debate about what Israel refers to. Biblically speaking, is Israel the physical nation, the Jewish people, or the spiritual people of God in Christ? How should we interpret that in its original context and apply it now?
Oh, boy.
Sorry.
Actually,
You want me to take this, Mark?
Okay, so as a person, so I'm a historian, so I have to put it through that lens, because if I don't do that, that's what I do. I mean, if I'm, that's what I do. And so this is how I look at it. God made treaties with people. That's what they are. The covenant is a treaty. Everyone in the ancient Near East knew about treaties. You make a treaty, make a stipulation, I make a treaty with you. If you break the treaty's broken, okay? When you die and I die, so we're still the kings again, my son and his successor, his son, now participate in the treaty. You know what they do? They have to ratify it, but the next time they ratify it, they modify it according to the new situation, okay? Here we are. It's a generation later, so the treaty's been ratified. Have you ever wondered why they duplicate the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy? Do you think we'll just read them again just in case you forgot. It's because it's 40 years later, it's a new generation. And if you start looking at the laws in Deuteronomy and you compare them to the laws in Exodus, they're a little different. The laws in Exodus are pretty rustic. They're still out in the field. The laws in Deuteronomy are probably more for an urban setting. Just think of it that way. Now, I'm going to get to the point, hopefully. So the point is that treaties are there to be made. God swears by the treaty. He realizes, like, Genesis 15, God swears by himself. And then he has a really, if you've never read Genesis 15, you're in for a treat. He cuts up animals, and then something passes through the parts. I just wrote an article on this that's going to get published, but I'm not. It's a smoking fire pot and a torch, and do they represent God? I don't know. I don't think so, actually. But the point is that something really weird is going on that was understood by an ancient. But these treaties are there. If they're broken, what does that mean? Well, I think Paul talks a lot about that. When you read the book of Romans, since we're in a different context than they were 2,000 years ago, we forget something. When Paul is writing that, there's a huge divide between a Gentile Christian and a Jewish Christian. They're at odds with each other. And of course, you've heard about Judaizers. In Acts 15, what does James say? Well, we heard that the Gentiles are following the Lord too, and miracles are happening. So all we want you to do, and he gave them some really random statements in Acts 15. Don't eat strangled animals, don't drink the blood, don't engage in fornication. He didn't just make those up. Those are 4 things from Leviticus 17 and 18, and these were things that probably would have been incredibly offensive to Jews. So do whatever you like according to love, but make sure you don't do these random things, which mean nothing to us today, but they sure did back then. And so, is the treaty still bound? On God's side, it sure is. Is it to be taken literally? Yes. Is it to be taken spiritually? Yes. In other words, I don't think there's an either or. Now, by the way, when I'm talking, not the historian's talking, I was raised in a good Reformed Presbyterian tradition. Then I went to a dispensational type church out in California. When I was 15, my mom decided to change churches, and there was this new hotshot pastor just down the street from us who had everybody just pick up a Bible by themselves and open it. His name was John MacArthur. And so I sat under his teaching for 20 years and taught at his Bible college and a seminary and all that. But the point is, Paul goes to tremendous pains in Romans 9 through 11 to make sure you know that my people are still my people. You know, when you read the book of Revelation, the Jews are still there, and guess who else is still there? The nations. The nations are still the nations, in my opinion. If you read Romans 11, you talk about when we're grafted on. What are we grafted into in Romans 11? It's not Israel. We're grafted into the seed of Abraham. The seed of Abraham is Christ. And so the nations come in, Israel comes in. We're separate but equal. Okay? And I know what Galatians says there's neither Jew nor Greek. That's metaphor, because it also says there's neither male or female. I got news for you. If you became a Christian, your gender didn't change. Okay? Your social status didn't change. Your ethnicity didn't change. And so is there a real nation? Yes. Has it happened? No. By the way, when Moses gave the law, he gave it to the sons of Israel. How many of you are the sons of Israel? Okay. It wasn't to the nations. You ask any rabbi from medieval times to the present, are the Goyim part of Israel? No. If they follow the true God, are they part of Israel? No. God is a separate people. And by the way, we became his people too. We got to be part of his family, but we're all together. If you're Irish, I have this is just my own little weird thing, but I have this imagination that when we get to heaven, God's going to say, all right, all the nations gather up. All right, the Irish are coming in. They're gonna wear their green. They're gonna play Irish songs, and they're gonna come in. The Armenians are gonna come in. And, you know, all the different people groups from Africa, from Borneo, they're all gonna come in. Hey, this is really cool. The Jews will come in first, of course, and we'll all get to be led by Paul because, of course, he was the apostle of the Gentiles. Now, I'm not authoritative on this, but the point is, yes, both are true. That's how I look at it. And by the way, how does that flesh out even with the present day? I don't know. God knows. You know, if Israel doesn't act the way it's supposed to, God will take a remnant. But that's the same way with us. You know, he allowed the Gentiles to come in. Are all the Gentiles coming in? No. We just don't think of Jew and Gentile anymore. We don't look at it that way because the Gentiles became so overwhelming in number in that the Jewish Christians lost their identity.
I was also a history major. And one of the things at UW-La Crosse, I got in an argument with a couple of professors, was how early were people reading and writing? And at that point, 50 plus years ago, they were talking about not until maybe 500-600 years before Christ.
Well,
how early do you think writing did begin? I mean, I saw the evidence for it being much earlier at that time.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I learned as a Mesopotamian scholar is that you talk about the documents you have. You do not talk about the documents you don't have. In other words, if you speculate, you'll get destroyed, either in a graduate seminar or giving a talk or whatever. Just you put up or you be quiet. If you don't have the text, you don't talk about it. So all I can tell you is about the documents that we have. And so right now, the earliest physical documents that have been found in the ground, which, by the way, were found in a trash receptacle context, which means they've already been discarded, right now is roughly around, this is how we date it, around 3500 BC. Don't ask me where the flood fits in this. So about 5,500 years before the present, we already have writing. And by the way, when we find it, the system is already sophisticated enough and being used in areas. For example, it's the biblical city of Erech is where we find the earliest writings. It's not far from Ur in southern Mesopotamia. We find the same types of writings at Susa in Iran and in northern Iran. So these are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away, about the same time period, which means that writing is probably older. They're using clay at that point. When they're using perishable material, guess what? It perished. And so, by the way, this is why we know a whole lot more about ancient Mesopotamia in terms of writings than we do about Egypt, because papyrus doesn't last as long. Think about what's going to survive from our culture. Stuff that's written on, stone inscriptions or whatever. Computers, no. Electronic stuff, no. Paper, no. It won't last. And so it's the stuff written on. And the earliest writing, by the way, is this language called Sumerian. Akkadian's a little bit later, or Babylonian. But when we find them, it looks as if we're already in Act 3 of a 4-act play. In other words, it's already been invented and working for quite a while, and so it could be even older than that. And the reason for writing looks as if it was for memory loss. It would be like this. Let's say this is a class and you're all my students. There's a couple hundred of you. And I just gave you an exam. And I got to remember, and I gave you 10 exams during the semester. And I got to remember what you all had. And I have to remember all your names. I just might forget. So I got to have some way of making notations. Well, if you're the first one who ever did that, that'd be hard to figure out. How do you do it in a way that somebody else can read it? And then how do you start writing poetry? I mean, it's another story. But no, writing is really, really early in terms of the human condition. How does that match with the biblical text? I don't know, but it does. The biblical text often does not answer the question that you're asking it. Like if you're saying, what were women like in the Bible? The biblical writer isn't answering that question. That doesn't mean you can't find it. It just means you have to realize, and that's what ancient historians are up to. We usually are asking questions of a document that the document isn't interested in revealing to us. It just makes it extra hard. Oh, by the way, it's a different script. It's a different language. Oh, and cuneiform texts, they don't always come like that. Sometimes they're broken, and they go to a museum in Berlin, and the other half goes to a museum in London. And some guy spends half his life figuring out, I think this tablet in London goes with this tablet I saw over here in Berlin. We're at war with them. I guess I can't look right now. It's really ridiculously difficult. But no, writing, when we get to the Greeks, writing history is already half old. In other words, the Greeks are we're halfway done with the history of writing when we get to the Greeks. They're babies. My grand professor, Bill Hallow, brought this up. By the way, I called him my grand professor once. He was not amused. He said, I'm not that old. Yeah, but you taught my professor. No, so what? So it's really, really early stuff. The cuneiform writing is very old. It was used from then. And the latest cuneiform texts are written in the 1st century of the Christian era. They're still writing texts, but it was superseded by parchment and the alphabet because it was so much easier to deal with. It lost out to the language that was used in the Near East and the language that Jesus spoke, which was not Hebrew and not Greek. He spoke Aramaic in his daily life.
Long-time listener, and thank you for having us here tonight. My question has like a picture leading to it. So in Exodus 4, Moses is given permission to have God's image to return to Egypt with miracles. And his wife stops him and says, stop, God is about to kill you, destroy you. So they circumcise their child's foreskin and they put it on his feet. So he walks into Egypt, a man with the image of God, with the covering of his body of his son's blood. Then we go to Jesus, and he's washing his disciples' feet, and he's saying, I'm giving you authority, man, to go in my image, to go against odds. So he gives God's image to man. So my question is, through your studies, have you found other traditions where man was given authority by Elohim to have this image and powers? Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe I'll answer that by simply talking about the concept of image. It was actually on the docket when I want to talk about Genesis 1, but I guess I got a little carried away. But the term image, actually the word selam in Hebrew is a cognate to a Babylonian word, which it means statue, believe it or not. And so if I'm a really nasty king, I come to your land, I come to your city, and I conquer you, but I got to go and conquer other cities. But I want to make sure that you don't forget me, so I'm going to make a selam of myself, and I'm going to look really scary and really mean. I'm going to be staring at you, give a nasty face, and I represent the real guy behind me. In other words, and so every time you think about committing treason against me, you're going to walk up and see that statue and say, oh, I don't like what he did when he came here. And so the statue is here, and I'm representing the real thing. So when we're image bearers, and every human being is one of them, we are the representative of the divine being. Is it physical? No, it's not. I mean, God doesn't have a body. And so we are here to represent God. How are we supposed to represent God? Well, the other word, likeness, it must have been understood well by an Israelite, because every commentator has a different opinion. Good thing I'm right. No, I don't know, but I'm going to give you my best shot. So the commentator, the image and likeness must be the outside and the inside. So what does it mean there'll be likeness? Probably. So how do I represent the true God? Probably by love, joy, peace. In other words, it's by my actions. How do you know I'm representing the true God? By acting like the true God. And how do I act like the true God? Well, as a New Testament person, it's because of the Spirit that's inside of me, because I can't do it. And so, and even if I'm not acting and I'm committing treason, I still have the image. It's tarnished. And so the image, and so being an image is representing the true God. That's what it meant to an Israelite in Genesis 1, and every Near Eastern person understood it in the same way, okay? And I think it's rather amusing if you think about it. Who's Moses writing to? A bunch of slaves from Egypt. And by the way, I'm just going to give you a teaser about tattooing. Tattooing was a mark of slavery in the ancient Near East. Everyone knew it. And that's why in Leviticus 19:28 it says don't tattoo. By the way, it doesn't mean don't tattoo yourself. It means don't tattoo a fellow Israelite. That's what it means. It says don't tattoo him. That would be like me saying, you know, when you come into here, make sure you don't wear an orange jumpsuit, please. Because like everyone would know, well, you probably just got out of the slammer. So, you wear a tattoo, it's because you're a slave, or you put one on somebody, you want to make him into a slave. You guys aren't, and they're all probably laughing because they all have markings on them in Moses' time. They all came out of Egypt. They probably got tattooed. And so it's probably pretty amusing to them. Now, I know what you're thinking. I don't do it for that reason. Just read Acts 15 again about what you're under or what you're not under. But so to me, that's the general way to try to answer a question like that, is that we are the image bearers. Every human being is, but a true image bearer is the one who does the will of God. That's what it means. It's pretty generic. We're his representatives, act like it. They'd be like my father saying, all right, he never really said this to me, but I saw it in the movie, all right, son, go out and act like a Chavalis, and so what does that mean, Dad? But you've seen old movies like that. That's really what it means. I think we have.
Yeah, and we got
one more.
You better be quick, Mark. All right, one more question.
When watching the Patterns of Evidence documentaries by Timothy Mahoney, I found some, he presents some evidence that the Gulf of Aqaba did not exist. Modern explorers in the area did not draw it until the 1800s. And there are ancient Near Eastern roads that do not act like it was there. They cross it as if it wasn't there. Do you have any evidence that it was there?
Can you repeat it for me?
The Gulf of what?
The Gulf of Aqaba.
Yes. Okay.
Gulf of Aqaba. Was it there?
I don't have any particular evidence there. All I can tell you is that the coastline has changed dramatically in a lot of different areas. For example, Ur, we think was probably on the Persian Gulf in antiquity. Today, it's far inland. Okay, so, and I know that they've done a good amount of underwater archaeology in that area around Qatar and other places, and they have found excavations. But as you can guess, underwater archaeology is not only expensive, it's sort of hard to do. And I know an Israeli woman who has been doing underwater archaeology on the Mediterranean coast, and I'm thinking, it just blows my mind. Regular archaeology is hard enough. And so I don't have any specific information, but I will say that things like that are being done, and they have found things. If we're looking for chariot wheels, no. There was a rumor going around, I think in the 90s, that they found chariot wheels, in the Red Sea area, for example. That was somebody trying to prey on people's religious sensitivities, I think. Like, well, that would really be cool. It wasn't true. And for me, for example, I had a guy call me up once the day before I was going on a dig, and he says, hey, I got your name. We think we found Noah's Ark. I said, oh, that'd be cool. Yeah, we were just in Turkey, and we found some of these inscriptions, and we got them here. We wanted you to take a look at them. I said, did you smuggle them out of the country? Well, yeah. I said, do you have my name on a piece of paper? He said, yeah. I said, would you take that piece of paper and put it in your mouth and eat it? I said, what are the inscriptions like? And he described them. I said, well, those look like Syriac. That's like early Christian. Sorry, guys. So in other words, people so desperately are looking for it as if their faith depends upon whether they find it or not. It'd be really cool to find. And by the way, if I found Noah's Ark, would that prove the Bible to be true? Yes and no. It would prove maybe the historical nature. It wouldn't prove the theological nature behind it. That's something different. Because if I go to Greece and find a temple to Zeus, that means there was a temple to Zeus. Does that mean that Zeus is real just because I found his temple? So just don't put these things together. Archaeology can help understand the Bible better. It doesn't necessarily confirm it on a one-to-one correspondence. Frankly, what archaeology does is it really provides a whole lot more questions that spur me on to learn more and more. And I think that's what heaven's like. We get to heaven, you're thinking, what will we do in heaven? Well, God's infinite, and we got eternity. Are we ever going to start learning? Stop learning? No. So sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah.
Good place to stop.
That's a good place to stop. All right. So unfortunately, like if you do have more questions or you want more answered on the question you do have or that you even asked, you have like a follow-up, email us at theburiedbiblepodcast@gmail.com. Like Mark said, he's retired. He really wants your questions. That's his day job. It's his full-time job. And so right now he spends all day commenting and responding to our YouTube comments. So if you have a question, he really will answer it. So please feel free to support the podcast, follow us everywhere, subscribe. And if you have questions, Mark actually wants to interact with you guys. He's so sick of interacting with my questions. So please bring him some joy in life. But otherwise, we really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you. Hope you learned something. And yeah, we just pray that you would love the Bible and love Jesus even more. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Take this off now.
by the end. That was it. That was my last go.
Man.